Hello and welcome to another edition of Viewpoint. It's been called a hidden epidemic, one which often occurs behind closed doors and regularly goes unreported. According to Amnesty International, violence against women is one of the world's most widespread human rights abuses. Amnesty's director in Australia, Mallinson, says the time has come for the authorities to act, with Amnesty calling on the government to launch a national plan of action, a coordinated national plan to deal with the problem. Mallinson, thank you very much for joining us on Viewpoint. When I look back over your career, I see that you've worked predominantly in the UK and in the not-for-profit sector, particularly in the human rights area. What drew you to Australia? What brought you to Amnesty International?
Well, Amnesty International and working for Amnesty International is really my dream job, and it combines all my previous years of experience. I started off working in disability rights, as you say, in the UK, and that really inspired me to want to be part of the rights movement for the rest of my career, I suppose. I was working with parents and carers, mums and dads who were trying to get the very best for their disabled children. After that, I've worked for a cancer research organisation and then latterly Greenpeace before I moved to Amnesty International. So all of those different aspects in terms of campaigning, in terms of a research-based organisation, and then rights-based, led me, I suppose, to Amnesty International.
Now, you've been on your role for a little over a year now, 15, 16 months since you started with Amnesty. In that time, how have you found the operations of Amnesty International in Australia and the issues, therefore, that you're dealing with?
Amnesty International it's a really special kind of organisation, and it's got a number of key ingredients that makes it special. First and foremost, it's about saving lives, and that's what kind of drives me every day. But its power comes from the fact that it's an independent movement of people. We've got over 2.2 million members right around the world. Here in Australia, close to 100,000 now, which is absolutely fantastic. And because we're international, we can pull together all the different parts of the movement to have real impact.
Obviously, the organisation has had an impact over the years, but in terms of your term here, your time, how have you found the influence of Amnesty when it comes to dealing with the various governments, state and particularly federal government?
Well, we've had some significant successes in the last 12 months. Obviously, we've seen the end of temporary protection visas and the closing of the Pacific solution in terms of our refugee work. We've seen the government commit to consultation about a Human Rights Act, and we've seen the government saying that yes, it will look to have a national plan of action to stop violence against women. And obviously one of the most momentous things we've seen in the last year was the government saying sorry to the Indigenous population.
Generally, when you look at the activities of Amnesty, do you find that there is a high level of recognition of what you do around the country?
Sure. I mean, we've actually just done a survey which shows that, over 85% of the population here in Australia know about Amnesty International and on its work. So, we have huge support at a grassroots level, and that means that, I go as a result of that and get meetings with ministers and can actually put the issues of our supporters right at the table of government.
That survey, as I understand it, focused very much on Australians' attitudes towards human rights and the need for more protection in terms of human rights. I'll come back to that in a moment, as well as the Violence Against Women campaign. But I just wanted to raise with you the fact that up until a couple of years ago, Amnesty only ever focused on or conducted campaigns to do with other countries. There were no domestic human rights campaigns. Now, however, you do that. What drove that change? What was behind that?
Well, we focus on both, and both's critically important. And one of the reasons why I joined was the fact that in Somalia late last year, a girl called Aisha was gang raped by 3 men. She reported the attack. As a result, the militia arrested her and charged her with adultery. following a very brief trial, she was then taken to a stadium and stoned to death, watched by over 1,000 men. So our international work is absolutely crucial, and we are absolutely committed to ensuring that situations like that, horror situation for Aisha in Somalia, don't happen again. But there are significant human rights abuses that are happening right here in Australia. And violence against women happens right here in Australia. It's one of the human rights abuses that often doesn't get mentioned, but it cuts right across race and culture and every aspect of society. The latest figures show that 57% of Australian women suffer some form of physical or sexual abuse, and the figures are just mind-blowing. One woman every week is murdered by her current or former partner here in Australia. 345 women every single day, suffer some form of sexual violence. This is a significant human rights abuse here in Australia, and that's why we're committed to actually doing something about it here in Australia, and that's why we're working to have a national plan of action.
It is hidden, isn't it? This is an area that's not talked about a lot. It's something that tends to go on behind closed doors, and people don't tend, in many cases as I understand it, to actually go to the police unless something extremely serious has happened. Why is that?
Well, there's a whole range of reasons in terms of stigma and people not wanting to come forward. But one of the reasons, is that we don't have appropriate systems in place in terms of provision of services. There aren't enough safe houses. If you go into the Indigenous community areas, a safe house is a tent. Now, in my view, if you've just suffered a serious abuse and you put in a tent, that's not going to feel very safe for you. So, we're looking to ensure that, there is proper provision of services. There is a zero tolerance in terms of attitude and awareness, and that's why the whole issue of prevention is so important. And then there needs to be prosecution of the perpetrators. Most rapes don't come to court, and victims are not getting justice. And if you look at Australia, we have, in my view, the crazy situation where different states have different forms of legislation. So we're looking towards the federal government to ensure there's harmonisation in terms of prosecution. So there are some real reasons, and the research that we did in our Setting the Standard report brings together all the good practice from around the world. And one of the things that we're looking towards the government to do is to look at the findings and actually set the best standard. Take the findings from Denmark, take the findings from Ireland, and actually make sure the best happens here for Australian women.
How does Australia rate? Because in reading the Setting the Standard report, one of the primary focuses was to identify the gaps in terms of Australia and the rest of the world. So how do we rate internationally?
Well, if you look at the whole issue of funding, and that came out as probably the most single important factor to ensure a successful plan actually gets implemented effectively. Australia's way behind the 8 ball. If we were to match the European average, we'd have to increase our funding by 50%. But if we want to be, the best in the world, we would need to look at countries like Ireland. And Ireland, we would need to increase our funding 6-fold to match what happens in Ireland.
What are the respective figures then? I take it we're talking about how many cents or dollars are spent per 1,000 or 10,000 people, are we?
Yeah, we're spending less than a dollar a person here in Australia.